I made this fairly decent welding cart using absolutely no welding experience, metal from a door that I pulled out of my old prison bus, and some metal from a bed someone sent me that I never actually set up. Let's get started. So this is one of those old doors pulled out of the bus, and I just measured it into 3 sections for the cart and chopped them up. The door also had some handles on it and wheels and whatnot, and I cut those off just to kind of clean it up and give it a cleaner, smoother look. It also ended up with some sharp edges that I cleaned up. And this is a total diversion, but I was using this Bosch grinder, and it was so annoying. It had a horrible mechanism for getting it going and keeping it going. So you'll see later in the video, I actually returned this grinder and switched over to a Milwaukee, which is just way, way better. I always loved Bosch tools, but this one was a nightmare. These are the 3 sections that I use for the cart. Now I also have this metal for these bed frames that I mentioned, and it was really thin stuff, not very great quality, but it's what I had on hand, and I used that metal to kind of build the frame. One thing I really love that I picked up are these right angle magnets. And this is the one time I actually checked an angle on the project, and then started to weld, only not really. I just couldn't get the welder to work. It took a bunch of tries. I finally ended up grinding off all the paint and started to actually make some welds. This is actually the first weld I've ever made, other than the 10-minute lesson my buddy Steve gave me. And I'll show it to you. It looks pretty good, I think. Not exactly the stack of dimes you're supposed to go for, more like burned shrapnel, but it looked good to me. And as I went along with the welding, I did start to get the feel for it a little bit. That metal from the old bed frame was pretty thin, whereas the metal for the door from the old prison bus door was pretty thick. So it was kind of an odd combination, and if you weren't careful, you would melt through the thin stuff. Here I am perfecting my technique for fitting this together. It got pretty sloppy there. Finally, I did figure out a way to hold it together and started locking on that second shelf. And as you can see here, for some reason my welding style involves just putting my face almost right up against the welding gun. It's probably not the preferred method. But check it out, I've got some welds and the cart seem pretty solid. I think I overdid it on a few of these joints, but I was having fun with it. Next up was the top tier, and a big surprise, it did not fit perfectly. It was kind of close, but took a little grinding and finally got it to the right length so that it fit in place with a few thumps. And that smoke there, I think, is all the paint burning. I was grinding pretty well at the beginning, but then I just started to weld on top of the paint, which I'm guessing is not really kosher. All right, here's the whole cart upside down. The next job is to put the wheels on it. The wheels needed a little bit more metal underneath them for bracing, and I cut those pieces and then welded on the wheels. This is just tuning up some of that bracing that needed to be a little bit shorter. And I welded on all 4 wheels. They seem pretty solid. Stack of dimes. Alright, so I got the cart all together, and the next thing I wanted to do was figure out what would fit on it, namely the welder. And the handle was just a little bit too high. It's kind of a long story, but when I measured I was just a little bit off. So no problem, I just took off that beautiful handle and the welder fit on the cart. And the next thing was to get the tank on it. I designed it with that little platform for the tank, and it was good, it fit, but it was really, really wobbly. So the next thing I wanted to do was just kind of figure out a way to really lock that tank in place. I pulled some metal out of my scrap bin and bent it into a right angle, and then welded those guys to the cart kind of right around the tank. And you'll see in a minute that these welds were some of the worst that have ever been done. These little brackets just popped right off. A little bit more of that metal from the bed. Used to just kind of tune up the cart, make it look a little more complete, and cover some of the sharp edges. There you go. Those are the brackets just popping off on the bottom. Those welds were done without grinding away any of the paint or anything. I think maybe that's why they were so weak. So the next thing I did after kind of kicking myself was grind them down and weld them back in place. And it seemed a lot better after that. I also did a good job of grinding my hands right there. Kind of a patented technique. And using a big old rubber cord I found on the side of the road about 10 years ago, I strapped that tank in place, and it was actually pretty solid. Next thing was to put some hooks on the cart, and just welded these guys in place and put a big old spring on the top, which is one of the coolest things on the whole cart. That holds the welding gun. If there's one thing you take away from this project, on your own welding cart, you've got to put a spring on top. It's just really, really cool. Put a few more little wrenches on the side to hold some discs, and the cart was ready to be painted. Of course, that meant that I had to take everything off it, but it didn't take too long. And before painting it, I just hit it with the wire brush to kind of clean off some of the rust and loose bits of paint and whatnot. The damn cart on wheels just kept trying to get away from me. And I found a can of spray paint in the shop, and really cleaned it up with some black paint. I always like to use my black spray paint really close to my white garage door. I don't think I got any on there, but it was pretty close. And then here is the finished cart, all painted and everything put on it. You can see I've got the spring for the torch up there at the end, or the gun, or whatever it's called. I've got my mask right here. I've got my coils over this hook. And on the second shelf, I got my grinder and the welders on the bottom. Around back, you can see that I welded on a couple things, a wrench and a Allen wrench to hang my grinding discs. And up top, I've just got my, what is this stuff? This nozzle gel for protecting the nozzle. And then on the back here, I've got the tank secured pretty well, and it is ready to go.